Okay. I'll start class with a very broad question. Okay, with a very broad question. And I should have looked at everything. Can I get a volunteer? Okay, what's your name, sir?
Matt.
Matt. Matt, exercise. Can you exercise for us?
Sure.
I don't care what it is or anything else, but exercise for us. Okay, many of you are nodding your heads. Okay, thank you, Matt. You may sit down. What makes you all that were nodding your heads makes you think that was exercise?
Movement of the body with resistance.
Movement of the body with resistance. Okay.
Broader, just say it's using the muscles in a way that's not normal physical activity.
He's using his muscles in a way that is not normal physical activity. Okay. Interesting. Anybody else? What makes something exercise?
It looks like an intentional movement to get stronger.
It was intentional to get stronger. Okay, Matt, was that what, were you going to get stronger?
Something like that. Yeah.
Maybe, okay. It's intentional, okay. There's another hand down here, no? What's the common thing that you guys have all said? Planned movement, okay. Good, y'all are remembering some things from health and fitness. This is excellent, okay. What makes exercise different than physical activity is intentionality, right? That the goal of exercise is to improve fitness, okay? So it's a special case of physical activity. What makes something physical activity is movement. How do I get movement? Matt was moving, he was doing a bicep curl because it's Wednesday, right? And it's bicep day. Monday was chest day, right? What gets us movement? How do we move? This may be the single most important question for the entirety of class. How do we get movement? Everything we do from now on is going to flow from the answer to this one simple question. Everybody put your hand up. Is that movement? Okay. How did you do that? Contracted a muscle. Okay. How do I contract a muscle? My brain. Are we sure? Did you think about putting your arm up? Are you really sure that you thought about it? When you walk, do you think about the fact that I'm walking? Or are you thinking off about like, no, my Instagram story is not looking the way that I want it to, or it's hot outside or something? Okay. What gets a muscle to contract? That's a question that we're going to get an answer to in the next couple of weeks. Okay, Matt.
We're talking voluntary contraction or just contraction across the board, whether it's voluntary or involuntary.
What is an involuntary contraction? Am I involuntarily contracting right now? Am I? My heart? You're telling me I can't make my heart stop beating? Everybody try, make your heart stop beating, right? That would be spectacular if we could and wildly dangerous, okay? But that's cardiac muscle, that's not movement, right? That's the heart maybe movement, that's not skeletal muscle, okay? Can you have an involuntary contraction of skeletal muscle?
Yes.
Yeah, anybody ever had a cramp? Pretty involuntary, right? Come to my lab and we will make you involuntarily contract with some electrical stimulation, okay? All right, so I asked this question not to be a pain in the ass, but because the key thing that makes something exercise is movement, okay? It's a particular intentional kind of physical activity that involves planned movements to improve fitness. Well, reduce that down. How do we get movement? Muscles, okay? Technically, it's not just muscles, right? It's muscles pulling on connective tissue, pulling on bones, counteracting gravity. Like we've got a whole bunch of, other things. But that's the big thing. Okay. So we're gonna start class, not because I'm a muscle physiologist with muscle, but because, to me, probably because I am a muscle physiologist, skeletal muscle is the single most important thing for exercise that there is. Okay? Your ability to contract a muscle is what lets you move, it's what lets you exercise. The other thing is that essentially every other physiological system outside of skeletal muscle functions during exercise specifically to support the ability of muscles to contract over and over and over and over and over again. Okay? When muscles contract, they use energy. That makes metabolism go up. When metabolism goes up, that we have to have a certain cardiovascular and pulmonary response to be able to counteract those things. Okay? Responses to training. Muscles get bigger, muscles get stronger, endurance improves, that's a metabolic issue. All of those things are going to come from the nature of the force produced, right? And the number of muscle contractions during exercise. That's why we're going to start with skeletal muscle. If you look in the book that I assigned you, you don't get to muscle until chapter 8, which really rubs me the wrong way. One of the book's authors is a friend of mine. And I have mentioned this to him, and he's a cardiovascular physiologist. He's like, well, Chris, but we don't talk about cardiovascular physiology until like chapter 10. And I'm like, I don't care. Right? It is not as important. So that's why we're going to start with this. Okay. That's why we're going to start with this. We are going to talk a lot in the next couple of days about structure of skeletal muscle. Okay. Which you guys have had in anatomy. You've had in physiology already. This is mostly going to be reviewed. But you guys are going to see, I'm going to try to draw attention to the individual structures that make up skeletal muscle. How it is organized together is key to imparting our ability to exercise, and it's key to imparting function. There's a relationship. Your muscles look the way that they do for a reason. It's not an accident. Okay? It's not an accident. All right. So, well, maybe this will move forward. There we go. So I wrote this on here. What's the function of a muscle? Generates force. Okay. Muscles have one job. Okay. One job. It's not to look good on Instagram. Muscles have one job, and it's to generate force. Okay. Generate force. Everything about how they are structured and organized is to impart an ability to generate force, which that's what lets us move. Okay. We will get into next week talking about a motor neuron. Okay. But skeletal muscle in specific is what we call voluntary. That means most of the time we have control over when it contracts and when it doesn't. I say raise your hand, you think raise my hand, and you do it. Okay. You've never ever been able to learn more. It's been really interesting for me about the voluntary nature of movement and things, except until you have a little kid who does not know how to do things. And you can see them like thinking about, like, I do this and I go here and all of those things that we just take for granted because we've done it for years and years. Okay. All right. So a little bit about muscle, just some kind of basic facts. You have somewhere between 600 and 700 muscles in your body. I'll tell this now, would it surprise you guys? I've never had a class in anatomy. I was a biology major. You know what you don't take when you want to go to med school and you're a biology major? You don't take anatomy. I've had vertebrate anatomy. I've had I've dissected frogs and pigs and cats and rats. I've taught anatomy and physiology as a class. Never had a class in anatomy. I'm sorry that we make you all take it. For many of you, you're going to have it for PT or OT or PA or something, but maybe take it with a grain of salt about how much you're going to end up using. Okay. So I know in general, there's about 660 muscles in the body. I know the names to about 6 of them. Okay. To about 6. All right. Muscles are made up of thousands of little cells that are gonna lie, that we're gonna call muscle fibers, and they lie in parallel to each other. We'll talk about that more in the next one, okay? Every muscle fiber is a cell, okay? So individual muscle fibers are cells. They are some of the largest cells in the natural world. We could open your leg up or your arm up or something and pull out one muscle fiber, and you can see it with the naked eye. So you can see an entire muscle cell with the naked eye. They're these giant cells, and there's going to be some structural consequences of all of that. Okay. Muscle is about 75% water, which I know that you guys know. Okay. Anyone ever taken creatine? When you first started, did you feel like you got real like swelly and all of those things? You increase creatine, it draws more water into your muscle. You look bigger because you have physically larger, like more water in your muscles. It's no new things. You can dehydrate yourself. You want to be in a bodybuilding competition. You can take salt pills. It look like a football or something at the end of everything. We can play with that water. It's about 20% protein and then kind of electrolytes and a few other things. It's the protein that really matters. Okay. It's the protein that really matters. We'll get way into all of that as we go along. Okay. Here's the big picture organization of skeletal muscle. Okay. How many of you know what a Russian nesting doll is? Anybody ever heard of a Russian nesting doll? Somebody tell me what happens with a Russian nesting doll. Right? You see a thing and you open it, and there's an identical thing that looks just like it, but it's smaller inside. And you open that one, and another, and another, and another, and another. Skeletal muscle is, in essence, a Russian nesting doll. Okay? If you can start from the outside, you have a whole muscle. I think this is my bicep, right? Right? Biceps brachii, brachii. Anyway, I told you guys I don't know very many. Okay? Take your whole muscle. If we were to cut it off, cut the tendon on both sides, okay? Whole muscle. Cut through, right? My subcutaneous fat, cut through the outer epimysium, the layer of fascia that's going to be there. We can look in and see these little bundles that you can see with the naked eye that are in there. Those are called fascicles. Okay? Open up a fascicle. And a fascicle is basically a bundle of individual muscle fibers, individual muscle cells, okay? So many fibers make up a fascicle, many fascicles make up a muscle. If you take the one cell, right, you take one individual muscle fiber, you pull it out, cut it open, and there are smaller and smaller little tubes inside of that one fiber called myofibrils. Myofibrils are made up of these little units called sarcomeres, but really the sarcomeres are made up of tubes or filaments that are made up of actin and myosin. Okay, so we have these individual proteins that make these kind of long tubes that get grouped together to make a larger tube that's a sarcomere. We stack sarcomeres end to end to make an even longer tube. That's a myofibril. We bunch those things together and you get fibers. You bunch fibers together, you get a fascicle. Bunch them and you get a muscle. So it's this sort of decreasing or increasing, depending upon where you start, collection of tubes. Okay. What I will hope to illustrate in the next couple of days is why would we do this? Right? Why not just have one thing that's there and that's what does it? Well, the big piece is by doing all of this, we can wrap each of these in connective tissue. And we can allow ourselves the ability by having many of these smaller things to only activate or turn on a small portion of these, and yet be able to transfer the force produced there up to make the whole muscle move, right? And that allows us what we call fine motor control. Okay, right? Matt curled his backpack. What if we had tricked him and made him think that his backpack didn't, it looked like it had stuff in there, but there was nothing, right? And he doesn't know how much force to generate. We're very, very good at going from a tiny amount of force to kind of full maximal kind of amounts. And we're allowed to do that and still function because of all of these little individual divisions that are there. Okay, so I want you guys to know what these terms are. I want you guys to know kind of the dichotomy and the order that goes there. And we're going to pull out some individual structures in a fiber, in a sarcomere. We're going to talk about the proteins. Okay. Does that make sense? I will say this a lot to you guys. Okay. Yes, nods of heads are good. If you have questions, please ask. Okay. Now, this is really all we're going to do is we're just going to mention these names, but it's actually very, very important. Okay. So wrapped around each of our kind of decreasing in size tubes is going to be something called connective tissue. Connective tissue is collagen, basically. It's stretchy stuff. Okay. And what it does is sort of serves two functions. Okay. Two big functions. One, it holds things together. It provides us some level of structure, okay? Some level of scaffolding for the house that is our muscles, if you want to look at it that way, okay? So we have the epimysium, right, which is going to surround fascicles, the paramysium, right, that is going to basically surround fibers, and the endomysium that's going to go around so some of our myofibrils and these things. We've got this that's going on here. Okay, so it provides structure. The other thing connective tissue does is it works like a rubber band. Okay, and that lets us do is if one part of a muscle contracts and generates force, the connective tissue transmits that force across the entirety of the muscle. And the epimysium, right, is what's going to eventually all come together down at the very proximal or very distal end, and it's going to form the tendon that connects us to our bones. So we use the connective tissue to transmit force from the muscle to a bone, and then that will hopefully allow that bone to move and rotate at a joint, and that gives us movement. Okay, that gives us movement. So connective tissue is really important. This will likely be the last time we talk about it in class. Okay, the absolute last time. That doesn't mean it's not super important, but we don't know a huge amount, and we just know that as long as it's there, we're good. Okay, as long as it's there, we're good. Okay. All right, let's hone down in on an individual muscle fiber. Okay, so we've cut open my bicep, we've cut open a fascicle, and we're going to pull out one individual muscle cell, one individual fiber. Okay, I'm sure you guys have seen a cartoon that looks like this all the time, but I want to highlight some really important structures in the fiber, because without those structures, we don't get voluntary control of contractions. We don't have an ability to regenerate ATP and contract over and over again. And some of these structures are going to be the things that will change when you train in certain ways. Okay? So, like every other cell, a muscle fiber has a cell membrane. We call that the sarcolemma. Okay? Sarco means muscle. I think it's Latin or Greek. It's one of those. It's Latin, something. Okay? Lots of things in muscles are going to have sarco in front of them. The sarcolemma is the outer membrane. Okay? It's actually very, very important. If you have problems with your sarcolemma, your muscles will not contract. Okay? We'll get into that probably a little bit on Friday, but maybe more so on Monday and Wednesday of next week on how exactly the sarcolemma helps us transmit signals and get muscles moving. Okay? I think I took the picture of it out, but I just want to mention it very, very briefly, is that just under the sarcolemma, there's some additional scaffolding that provides stuff in our fiber, and it's called the basement membrane. Okay? This is a hot area of research for muscle physiologists, is what's going on in the basement membrane. Okay? There's a huge number of proteins and things that are in there. There are certain diseases where the basement membrane gets messed up. Anybody ever heard of the disorder called muscular dystrophy? Okay. There is a protein called dystrophin, And if you have muscular dystrophy, your dystrophin protein is not folded correctly. And in muscular dystrophy, your basement membrane is weak and does not function correctly. And that causes a host of other problems. So I just want to mention it, okay? It may be something that those of you guys that go on in other classes and things, or that go on into graduate work, you may see more stuff come out about it. I just want you to know kind of where it is, and that's pretty much it, okay? Now, the next kind of key structure, so we have the outside the sarcolemma, we have these gold structures here, okay? Those are called T-tubules or transverse tubules, okay? Think of a transverse tubule as a tunnel, okay? I'm walking along the floor here, the floor is the sarcolemma, and I get to this square right here, and there's a hole, okay? And that hole leads into a tunnel that goes down into the floor, down under the floor here, okay? That's what a T-tubule does. It is actually, in the most technical sense, an extension of the sarcolemma, okay? It is a double membrane, double lipid bilayer, just like the sarcolemma. You come here and it pushes down, and it's going to run down into the inside of our muscle fiber, okay? These are absolutely of key importance for transmitting signals from the central nervous system and the sarcolemma down inside into the fiber where our proteins that undergo contraction are actually going to be. It's a key signaling molecule, okay? Should we torture someone? He says as he's about to ask for a volunteer. No? Matt, again? Matt, have you ever done a wall sit?
Once or twice.
Once or twice? You wanna come do a wall sit?
Can you teach me how to do it?
I mean, you just put your back on the wall and squat down. You guys want me to we're gonna make Matt, we're gonna mess up what's going on in his T-tubules in about 30 seconds, okay? The most common location of fatigue during kind of high intensity exercise is a disruption in the T-tubule. So Matt, just back against the wall, down, right, and about a 90-degree angle, like so. There we go. Sweet. I'm just going to time him. I am watching here. So as we do this, we're doing contraction, we're getting force, we're doing metabolism. One of the things that's going to happen in about 30 seconds or so is we're going to have a problem sending signals through his T-tubules, and that's going to lead to less downstream things happening in the sarcoplasmic reticulum and then down into his actin and myosin, okay? So anytime you go and lift weights or you do something like this, you run up a flight of stairs, we fatigue the T-tubules really, really quickly. See, I love it, right? He's locking in for us in the midst of all of this. So, okay, Matt, thank you. I should not do this, but Matt's a very, very good sport. So, okay. Those are T-tubules, right? Connected to the T-tubule on this kind of really dark maroon structure that you see here, it is this network, okay? It's a storage closet, it's a cabinet, whatever you want to call it, okay? But it's called the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and it has one job. It stores one thing. Anybody remember what it is that gets stored in the sarcoplasmic reticulum? Calcium. Very, very good, okay? So T-tubule is connected to the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Sarcoplasmic reticulum goes everywhere inside of fiber. It goes all around all the myofibrils, and it holds calcium, okay? We will talk a lot about calcium and why it's so important for muscle contractions, for exercise, and why if something happens to the sarcoplasmic reticulum and you get calcium out in your muscle for too long, it tells that muscle fiber something's wrong and it kills itself. So it's a fascinating kind of cycle. But that's the SR. Okay. Here we have mitochondria, right? It's the powerhouse of the cell, yay, whatever. We're going to talk a lot more about those when we get into metabolism. Okay, but you have mitochondria, they're going to be interspersed in there. Some of y'all more than others. We have a nucleus. All right. The interesting thing, the last two things here, a nucleus and a satellite cell. Muscle fibers, because they are so freaking big, okay, so big, have many nuclei. Okay, they are what we call multinucleated. That makes them very unique as cells in the world of everything. Okay. Do you guys know why don't we have single-celled bacteria that are the size of this room? That'd be a scary thought, right? Or a single-celled amoeba or a protist or something, right? All of my microbiology and cell biology is coming back. Why don't we have giant single-celled organisms? They're all very tiny. Why are they not huge? They have one nucleus. Why does that matter? Imagine you got one nucleus that's like this, and the cell's the side of this room. Why might that be bad? Not enough places to store DNA. Okay. What does the DNA make? Why do you have DNA? They make proteins, right? DNA contains the code to make everything that goes in every cell, right? And you have to open it up, right? You're gonna have flashbacks. Y'all have all had like intro to bio or something, right? Talking about protein synthesis and those sorts of things, right? So we open it up, we make RNA, RNA goes to a ribosome, we make a protein, we modify that protein, we package it up, we send it someplace, okay? If this is all I have, do you think I can make enough protein to keep this giant ass cell healthy? No, okay? There's a thing that's called surface area to volume ratio. And the reason that single-celled organisms are all very small is because they generally have one nuclei. They can only get so big before they exceed the capacity of their one nucleus to be able to keep everything supplied and healthy. Told you guys, muscle fibers are giant as cells go. The reason they can be giant is they have many, 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 many nuclei. Okay, many nuclei. So that's kind of a cool property of them. The other difference with these cells is, if you will look on here, you see over there kind of at about 10 o'clock on the picture, the nucleus is on the outside. Muscle fibers are unique additionally in the cell world in that they tend to have peripheral, okay, nuclei. They're located on the outside of the cells. They have many of them and they're on the outside. They're not down in the middle. Why might they not be in the middle? Too much stuff going on, okay? It will take up space if it's in the middle, where we're going to put sarcomeres and proteins and things that are going to help us generate force, okay? When we get into doing resistance training and some things, a hallmark if you do cell culture of muscle fibers is new muscle fibers or fibers that have been damaged and are repairing themselves. When you look at them in the microscope, their nuclei are actually in the middle. It's called central nuclei. That's a sign of a young or a developing muscle fiber. When they mature, they're going to move out to the outside. Okay. The last thing is something called a satellite cell. Now, if I showed you guys under a microscope a picture of a muscle fiber, it would be nearly impossible to tell a satellite cell from a nucleus on the outside. You got to zoom way in, and you get these things called satellite cells. They're actually encased in two membranes rather than one. You guys heard of satellite cells before? Well, you're like, maybe. What is a satellite cell? Who thinks that they know? No? You guys heard of stem cells? You guys know what a stem cell is? What is a stem cell? What makes a stem cell unique?
Specialist.
That's right. Okay. Stem cell, in theory, can become any other kind of cell that we need. That's why the promise of doing research on stem cells and things like I can take a stem cell from you and I can grow you a new kidney, right? By giving it the right signals. Or I could grow you neurons to put into your spinal cord, right? It could become anything. So satellite cells are specialized muscle-specific stem cells, okay? And you can make an argument that they're only ever going to become muscle cells, so they're really not truly a stem cell. But they are really, really important, and we'll get into them more when we talk about responses to training. Satellite cells exist to help us repair muscle fibers and make new ones. And they are unbelievably important for during resistance training for getting muscle hypertrophy. Okay. They do things in poor little rats and mice and cats where they zap them with radiation and they inactivate all of their satellite cells, and then they have them do resistance training and their muscles don't get any bigger. Okay? They don't repair themselves, they don't get any bigger. So we know that they're really, really key. So I just want to introduce that concept here. Okay? Introduce that here. Okay, so I'm pretty sure I talked through all of this kind of stuff. We talked through our tubular networks. We talked about this. I wanna highlight back at basically the connection of the T-tubule to the sarcoplasmic reticulum. I want to highlight a couple of very special receptors. Okay. We will next week do an assignment, and then we will do it in class because it is unbelievably important. We will go step by step, structure by structure, molecule by molecule, from your brain thinks about doing a contraction all the way down that signaling pathway until we get actin-to-myosin, forming a cross bridge and generating force. Okay, so I'm going to highlight this now. We'll circle back with it next week. Here in green at the top, this is a T-tube. Okay. Here in this kind of peach color, we're not going to call it, it's not quite burnt orange, right? We'll give it a horns down in that way with those things here. This is the sarcoplasmic reticulum. All right. So what we have done is we've zoomed in on where the T-tubule comes into very, very close contact with the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And there's a receptor, okay, in the T-tubule that is this kind of red orange structure right there. It's called the DHP, or the dihydropyridine receptor. Okay, I do want you to know the name of the receptor because this one's really, really important. Okay, the DHP receptor is in the T-tubule. It is what we call a voltage sensitive channel, or a voltage sensitive receptor. What that means is when the sort of voltage or across that membrane changes, which is what happens when we get an action potential, which we'll get into next week, okay? An action potential travels down the T-tubule and it reaches the DHP receptor, and that change in membrane potential turns it on, okay? So this is a key step in our signaling pathway. When I told you guys that we were going to mess up how his T-tubules work, one of the things that was going to happen while he was doing wall sitting is the ability for the action potential to travel and for DHP to be sensitive to it was going to get impaired. Right? The DHP receptor sends a signal from the T-tubule to the sarcoplasmic reticulum at a very, very specific receptor on the sarcoplasmic reticulum that I also want you guys to know. DHP is connected to or signals to what is abbreviated as the RYR receptor. That stands for ryanodine. Okay, the ryanodine receptor. DHP receptor opens the ryanodine receptor, and that allows calcium to leave the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay, you guys talked about, right? We store all of this calcium in the SR. We need it to signal a muscle to contract. We have to have a way to get it out, and it gets out through the ryanodine receptor. We'll get way more into this on kind of how it functions and why it's important next week. Okay. I also want to call attention to one other that is right here, a second receptor, or what it really is a pump. Okay. Here, that's also on the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And we abbreviate it, we call it SERCA. Okay, SERCA, the CA stands for calcium. It is a pump, and it's also an enzyme. It's called the calcium ATPase enzyme, or the calcium ATPase pump. Okay. ATP and ACE means that it splits ATP. This is a thing that uses energy. Right? SERCA, if ryanodine lets calcium out, SERCA puts calcium back in. Okay. We'll get into the importance of all of that and why that's really, really key for our ability to contract and relax and contract again with our muscles later on. But I wanted to introduce it here when we're talking about the anatomy of those tubular systems. Yes, sir.
So the voltage, like it's voltage sensitive, what does it stop?
I'm sorry, which one?
The DHP.
DHP is voltage sensitive, so it's sensitive to an action potential coming down the T tube. So that's what it does. Okay. We've got just a couple of minutes left, so we'll stop here. But that doesn't mean we're gonna talk about this for 2 minutes. Okay, so we'll pick up and we'll finish the rest of the stuff on Friday. How many of you guys on Monday, if I said we're gonna go, let me back up, not you guys, y'all are too smart, y'all know this. If we went to the Huff today, or we went to Steel today, okay, and we asked the bros who are definitely doing curls today what they need to do to get big, are they gonna say you should do 3 sets of 6 reps or 3 sets of 20?
Get big.
Okay, show of hands for 6. Show of hands for 20. Okay. To my like 3 people that said 20. Why are you differing from the crowd? That's so I need to do a lot to work on endurance, and that gets me hypertrophy. Can help. To the rest of you that said 6, why'd you say 6 and not 20? You all probably said 20 is for endurance, not for hypertrophy, right? Why 6? Okay. What if I'm doing 6 curls with this? Is that gonna be enough? No?
Looks to be a weight that it's hard to do around 6 reps.
Okay.
It's intermediate, yes.
You don't want the honest answer?
Depends on how you lift.
Doesn't matter. If you, and this has been a more recent finding and change in the exercise phys world. If you do reps of 20 or 50 or 15, and you do them until you cannot do an additional rep in each set, you get just as much hypertrophy as if you do sets of 3 or 4 or 6 or 8, 12, if those go to where you can't do enough. The key to muscular hypertrophy is failure. Lift until you cannot do another rep. Okay? Generally, it's easier to get to failure from a psychological standpoint if you're doing fewer reps with a heavier weight. If I told you you're going to curl this until you can't curl it anymore, you're going to get bored by about rep 1,000 or something, right? So it's generally easier, but physiologically, getting to failure, and we'll talk a lot about this when we do hypertrophy, we get the same, it activates the same cellular pathways, you get basically the same hypertrophic response. So if you want to blow a bro's mind, go tell them that they can do sets of 50 and get just as big. Also tell them that they're not going to get that big anyway and watch their ego go in the midst of all of this. All right. Okay. I'll see you guys on Friday.